he served his country with honor. But today, his life hangs by a thread because of the very people sworn to protect him. When a decorated veteran is left fighting for his life, his son, a relentless state prosecutor, steps in. This isn't just a fight for one man. It's a battle against a broken system. This is the story of a father's fight for survival and a son's mission to expose the truth. Will justice finally prevail? Stay tuned as this fight shakes a community to its core. Jim Mitchell was no stranger to routine, and that day started like any other in Brookhaven, Georgia. The small town's quiet streets and familiar faces had always been a source of comfort for the 67-year-old veteran. As the morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the local Veterans Hall, Jim sat among friends, sharing laughs and stories over cups of coffee that were always too strong. He was the kind of man whose presence filled a room not with noise, but with warmth and quiet dignity. His life had been one of service, both on the battlefield and in his community, and though his gait had slowed with age, his resolve had not. After an hour or two of reminiscing about the past, Jim decided to take the scenic route home, a decision that would alter the course of his life and that of his town forever. The town square was alive with its usual hum, children playing on swings, couples strolling hand in hand, and seniors like Jim enjoying the mild afternoon breeze. As he passed the park fountain, a commotion near the benches caught his attention. A young black man, barely out of his teens, stood cornered by a stocky white police officer, Harold Ramsey, whose booming voice cut through the air. "I said, empty your pockets." Ramsey barked, his stance radiating hostility. The boy's hands trembled as he tried to comply, his expression a mix of fear and confusion. Jim's military instincts kicked in. He had seen this kind of tension before, and he knew it could escalate quickly. Without hesitation, Jim approached, his calm yet commanding presence drawing the attention of the growing crowd. "Is everything all right here, officer?" Jim asked, his voice measured but firm. Ramsey turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Walk away." But Jim didn't walk away. "I'm just passing through," he replied evenly, his gaze shifting to the frightened boy. "He doesn't seem to be causing any trouble." Ramsey bristled, his frustration boiling over as the crowd began murmuring among themselves. The tension reached its peak when Jim took a step closer, his voice steady but resolute. "Let's not make a bad situation worse, officer." Those words seemed to push Ramsey over the edge. With a sudden and violent shove, Ramsey sent Jim sprawling backward. The crack of his head against the pavement was audible, silencing the crowd. Blood pooled beneath Jim's motionless body, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Some onlookers rushed to Jim's side, while others pulled out their phones, recording the shocking scene. Ramsey, his face pale and his hands trembling, barked into his radio, "Suspect injured. Need backup and medical assistance." But his voice betrayed his panic. As sirens approached in the distance, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their shock quickly turning to outrage. Unbeknownst to Ramsey, those recordings would become the spark for a movement that would shake Brookhaven to its core. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair as Marcus Mitchell rushed through its sterile halls. His phone call had been brief but shattering. "Your father's been hurt. He's at Brookhaven General Hospital." For Marcus, a seasoned state prosecutor known for his unyielding pursuit of justice, those words stripped away the professional armor he wore so easily. By the time he reached the ICU, his mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. The sight that greeted him was worse than anything he'd imagined. Jim lay unconscious, tubes and wires connected to machines that beeped in a monotonous rhythm, his once strong body rendered frail. "Severe head trauma," the doctor explained. "We're monitoring for swelling, but his condition is critical." Marcus's heart sank. His father, the man who had taught him to stand tall, to fight for what was right, was now fighting for his life. Outside the hospital, the community began to gather. News of the incident spread rapidly, thanks to the videos recorded at the park. The image of Jim lying motionless on the ground, blood pooling around his head, was seared into the minds of everyone who saw it. Protesters lined the streets, holding signs that read "Justice for Jim" and "End Police Brutality," their chants growing louder with each passing hour. Inside the police station, Harold Ramsey sat alone in an interrogation room, his bravado replaced by a growing sense of dread. He had always operated with impunity, confident that his badge would shield him from consequences. But the videos changed everything. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself drowning in emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel: anger, fear, helplessness. Sitting beside his father's bed, he whispered, "I'm going to make this right, Dad. I promise." That evening, he met with his closest allies, including Julia, his trusted legal advisor. Together, they began piecing together a strategy, combing through every second of footage, every witness account. "This isn't just about Ramsey," Marcus said, his voice steely. "This is about a system that let him operate unchecked. We're going to expose all of it." As the first day ended, the battle lines were drawn, a community demanding justice, a prosecutor determined to deliver it, and a police department scrambling to contain the fallout. Brookhaven had always prided itself on being a close-knit community, but the events surrounding Jim Mitchell's assault exposed cracks in its facade. The park, once a place of laughter and relaxation, was now a symbol of outrage and injustice. Protesters filled the streets day and night, their voices a relentless demand for accountability. The crowd grew with each passing hour, drawing people from neighboring towns and even national media. For Marcus, the pressure was both a motivator and a weight. At the hospital, he split his time between his father's bedside and strategy sessions with his team. Each visit to Jim's room was a painful reminder of what was at stake. "He's stable, but the swelling hasn't gone down," the doctor told him one morning. Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched, determined not to let despair distract him from the fight ahead. That afternoon, Marcus held a town hall meeting, inviting community leaders, activists, and anyone willing to contribute to the cause. The room buzzed with energy as people shared their stories of police misconduct, each testimony adding fuel to the fire. Among the speakers was Gerald, a fellow veteran and longtime friend of Jim. "We've known about Ramsey for years," Gerald said, his voice filled with anger. "He's bullied half this town, and the department's done nothing to stop him." Marcus listened intently, taking notes and formulating a plan. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Chief Paul Simmons faced mounting pressure. "This department is under siege," he growled during a closed-door meeting with his senior staff. "We need to control the narrative, or we're done for." Simmons ordered Ramsey to remain on leave, but the tension within the department was palpable. Officers whispered about who might be next to fall, and the once solid wall of silence began to crack. For Marcus, the challenge was clear: turn those cracks into a full-blown collapse. As the investigation deepened, Marcus uncovered a disturbing pattern of corruption within the Brookhaven Police Department. Complaints against Harold Ramsey had been filed for years, allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and abuse of power, but none had resulted in disciplinary action. Internal memos revealed a culture of complicity, with senior officers, including Chief Simmons, routinely dismissing complaints to protect their own. Marcus's legal team, led by Julia and assisted by the resourceful investigator David, worked tirelessly to connect the dots. "We're looking at systemic corruption," Julia said during a late-night strategy session. "This isn't just about Ramsey, it's about a department that's been rotten for years." Meanwhile, the threats against Marcus escalated. One night, he returned to his car to find the windshield shattered and a note that read, "Back off, or you're next." Julia urged caution, but Marcus refused to back down. "They're scared because they know we're getting close," he said. The turning point came when a young officer named Kyle Thompson agreed to meet with Marcus in secret. Kyle, a rookie who had grown disillusioned with the department, provided key details about how complaints were buried and officers like Ramsey were protected. "It's all about loyalty," Kyle explained. "If you speak out, you're done." Armed with this testimony and a growing stack of evidence, Marcus prepared for the next phase of his battle. The fight for justice was no longer just about his father, it was about dismantling an entire system of corruption. Marcus Mitchell had never been one to back away from a fight, but this battle was different. It was personal, and every move felt heavier under the weight of his father's critical condition. The hospital had become a second home as he split his time between monitoring Jim's progress and orchestrating the case of a lifetime. Marcus's team grew in urgency, their meetings stretching into the early hours of the morning as they combed through a mountain of documents and video evidence. "We need someone on the inside to come forward," Julia insisted during one particularly tense session. "The records we have are damning, but an insider's testimony will make this case airtight." Enter Kyle Thompson, the rookie officer whose conscience had become too loud to ignore. Meeting in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Brookhaven, Kyle confessed to years of complicity he had witnessed within the department. "They cover for each other, always," Kyle said, his voice trembling. "Simmons made sure every complaint disappeared." Marcus listened intently, recording every word while reassuring Kyle that his identity would be protected. But Kyle's involvement came with risks. Days after their meeting, Kyle received a menacing note stuffed in his locker at the station: "Keep quiet if you know what's good for you." The threats didn't stop there. Marcus returned to his office one evening to find the word "traitor" spray-painted across his door. Julia and David pleaded with Marcus to increase his security, but he brushed it off, focusing instead on the growing mountain of evidence. "They're scared," Marcus said, a steely determination in his voice. "That means we're winning." Meanwhile, the community's anger showed no signs of waning. Protesters blocked streets, demanding justice not just for Jim but for every victim of police misconduct. Local businesses joined the movement, displaying signs that read, "We stand with justice." The momentum grew as families began sharing stories of harassment and abuse at the hands of the police. Each story added to the case Marcus was building, painting a damning portrait of a department rife with systemic corruption. Ramsey, meanwhile, was unraveling. Confined to his home, he watched the news with growing paranoia. Each revelation about the department felt like a noose tightening around his neck. His lawyer, Raymond Price, urged him to cooperate. "If you want to save yourself, you need to start talking," Price said bluntly. Ramsey resisted at first, his arrogance blinding him to the severity of his situation. But as the evidence mounted, he realized he was running out of options. The tipping point came when Marcus leaked internal memos showing that Chief Simmons had personally dismissed complaints against Ramsey. The memos were damning, exposing a culture of protectionism that extended to the highest levels of the department. The leak sent shockwaves through the community and put Simmons squarely in the crosshairs of the investigation. Ramsey, now desperate, reached out through his lawyer to broker a deal. "I'll talk," he told Marcus during a tense meeting. "But I want a reduced sentence." Marcus didn't flinch. "You'll get a deal if, and only if, you give us everything we need to take down Simmons and the rest of the department." Ramsey hesitated but ultimately agreed, providing a detailed account of the corruption that had enabled his behavior for years. His testimony was the breakthrough Marcus needed, but it came with a bitter reminder that the fight was far from over. As Marcus prepared to move forward with Ramsey's testimony, the hospital continued to serve as a stark reminder of why this fight mattered. Jim's condition remained precarious, and every day brought new challenges. Doctors monitored him closely, their updates carefully neutral as they tried to manage Marcus's expectations. "We're seeing some signs of improvement in his brain activity," one doctor said during a morning consultation. "But it's still too early to tell." The news offered a glimmer of hope, and Marcus clung to it like a lifeline. He spent every spare moment at Jim's bedside, speaking to him as though he could hear every word. "We're close, Dad," Marcus whispered one evening. "Ramsey's going down, and Simmons won't be far behind. Just hang on a little longer." Outside the hospital, the protests took on a new tone. What began as anger and outrage had evolved into a powerful display of solidarity. Candlelight vigils replaced some of the daytime rallies, their soft glow casting long shadows across the town square. The community wasn't just demanding justice anymore, they were fighting for change. During one particularly moving vigil, a young boy stepped forward to speak. Clutching his mother's hand, he said, "Mr. Mitchell is a hero." My mom says he stood up for people like me." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the night. Inside the police department, however, the mood was anything but hopeful. Chief Simmons faced mounting pressure as more evidence surfaced. Leaks from within the department painted him as the architect of a deeply entrenched system of corruption. Officers who once supported him began to distance themselves, fearing they would be implicated. Simmons knew his time was running out. He convened a private meeting with his closest allies, hoping to salvage what little control he had left. "We need to stick together," he said, his voice sharp with desperation. "If anyone breaks ranks, we're all finished." But the cracks in his authority were too deep. Officers began cooperating with Marcus's investigation, providing key details about cover-ups and misconduct. Among them was Gerald Barnes, a retired officer who had witnessed Simmons's corruption firsthand. Barnes's testimony, combined with Ramsey's, created an unassailable case against Simmons. Back at the hospital, Marcus received a late-night call from the doctors. "Your father's condition is stable," the voice on the other end said. "But we've noticed an increase in his responsiveness. It's a positive sign." Marcus rushed to Jim's room, his heart pounding with cautious optimism. Sitting beside his father, he took his hand and said, "We're almost there, Dad. I can feel it." The days following Jim's slight improvement were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus and his team. Ramsey's testimony opened the floodgates, providing a roadmap to the department's corruption that Marcus had only begun to uncover. The revelations were staggering: falsified reports, missing evidence, and a culture of silence that extended beyond Brookhaven. Julia worked tirelessly to connect the dots, her meticulous nature ensuring that no detail was overlooked. "This isn't just about Brookhaven," she said during one late-night meeting. "This system is bigger than we imagined." David, ever resourceful, tracked down additional whistleblowers, including Danielle, the former administrative assistant who had kept copies of incriminating documents. Danielle's files were a treasure trove, revealing years of misconduct that implicated not just Simmons but other senior officers across the region. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of his case, he faced a new challenge: controlling the narrative. The police union launched a counteroffensive, accusing Marcus of grandstanding and jeopardizing public safety. Their statements fueled a media frenzy, dividing public opinion and threatening to undermine the movement. Refusing to be deterred, Marcus held another press conference. Standing before a crowd of reporters and community members, he presented the latest evidence, including Danielle's files and Ramsey's testimony. "This isn't about one bad officer or one corrupt chief," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This is about a system that has failed its people for far too long. And we won't stop until it's dismantled." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy reinvigorating Marcus. But the fight was far from over. That night, Marcus returned to the hospital to find Jim's eyes fluttering open. It was a fleeting moment, but it filled Marcus with renewed hope. "You're still fighting, Dad," he whispered. "And so am I." Brookhaven had become the epicenter of a national movement. What began as a local fight for justice had grown into a rallying cry for police reform across the country. Protesters from neighboring towns joined the marches, and social media amplified their voices, drawing attention from civil rights organizations and politicians. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, balancing his responsibilities as a prosecutor with his role as a community leader. His office became a hub of activity, with volunteers organizing rallies, managing media inquiries, and compiling evidence. "This is bigger than us now," Julia said one afternoon. "People are watching. They're counting on us to see this through." Inside the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Simmons, now isolated and desperate, tried to rally his remaining allies. But his efforts were in vain. Officers who once stood by him began turning over evidence, each new leak further solidifying Marcus's case. Ramsey, now fully cooperating, provided details about how Simmons orchestrated cover-ups and protected abusive officers. His testimony painted a damning picture of a department that prioritized loyalty over justice. The turning point came during a massive rally in the town square. Thousands gathered to hear Marcus speak, their voices united in their demand for change. "This fight isn't just about my father," Marcus said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about every person who has been silenced, ignored, or hurt by a broken system. Together, we will rebuild something better." The rally ended with a powerful chant, "Justice for all." As the sun set over Brookhaven, Marcus returned to the hospital, exhausted but determined. Sitting beside his father, he said, "We're making progress, Dad. One step at a time." As Marcus stood in the town square, surrounded by thousands of protesters and the glow of candlelight, he felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. The fight for justice had taken on a life of its own, expanding beyond Brookhaven to capture the attention of the nation. Yet, as the movement grew, so did the resistance. That morning, a scathing article from the police union accused Marcus of exploiting his father's condition for personal gain, framing him as a politician in disguise rather than a prosecutor fighting for justice. The media frenzy that followed threatened to erode the public's trust in his mission, and Marcus knew he needed to act fast. Back at his office, Julia and David were already brainstorming damage control strategies. "We need to remind people why this started," Julia said, flipping through a folder of evidence. "The focus has to stay on Ramsey and Simmons, not you." Marcus nodded but felt the sting of the accusations. Despite his unwavering resolve, moments like these reminded him of the personal cost of this fight. That evening, while reviewing documents, Marcus received an unexpected call from Danielle, the administrative assistant turned whistleblower. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice trembling. She explained that she had found additional records in an old email account, records that directly tied Simmons to an attempt to bribe a judge to dismiss previous complaints against Ramsey. Marcus wasted no time, arranging a midnight meeting with Danielle in a secure location. As she handed over the documents, her fear was palpable. "This is bigger than I thought," she whispered. "Be careful." The records were explosive, and Marcus knew they could tip the scales in his favor. However, releasing them carried significant risks. Simmons was already a cornered animal, and exposing his corruption further would only make him more dangerous. Marcus decided to move forward, holding a press conference the next morning to reveal the documents to the public. These records show a deliberate effort to obstruct justice at the highest levels of the Brookhaven Police Department, Marcus declared, his voice unwavering. "This is not just a failure of leadership, it's a betrayal of the community." The revelation reignited the movement, drawing even more attention to the case. But that night, as Marcus returned to his office, he found a bullet lodged in the window near his desk, a chilling reminder that the fight was far from over. The attempt to intimidate Marcus only strengthened his resolve. "They're scared," he told Julia and David the next morning as they inspected the shattered glass in his office. "And scared people make mistakes." Marcus's team refocused their efforts on Simmons, whose influence over the department continued to erode. Ramsey's testimony had already provided a roadmap of corruption, but Marcus needed something definitive to ensure Simmons's conviction. Meanwhile, the community's support surged. Local businesses began donating supplies for the rallies, and churches organized prayer meetings for Jim's recovery. The unity was inspiring, but it also placed Marcus under even greater pressure to deliver results. Inside the police department, Simmons was unraveling. Once confident in his ability to control the narrative, he now found himself surrounded by betrayal. Officers who had once been loyal began turning against him, sharing details of backroom deals and buried investigations. Among them was Officer Kyle Thompson, who finally agreed to testify publicly after weeks of hesitation. "It's time," Kyle said during a late-night meeting with Marcus. "I can't stay silent anymore." Kyle's testimony was a bombshell, detailing how Simmons had ordered officers to falsify reports and intimidate witnesses to protect Ramsey. His courage inspired others within the department to come forward, creating a cascade of revelations. Simmons, now fully isolated, made a desperate attempt to cut a deal. "I'll give you names," he told Marcus during a tense phone call. "But I want immunity." Marcus didn't flinch. "You'll face justice just like everyone else," he replied. That afternoon, Simmons was arrested, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self as he was led out of the station in handcuffs. The image of his arrest spread like wildfire, becoming a symbol of accountability. For Marcus, it was a major victory, but he knew the battle wasn't over. Back at the hospital, Jim's condition remained stable but unchanged. Sitting by his father's bedside, Marcus whispered, "We're getting closer, Dad. I just need a little more time." The courtroom was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation as the trial of Harold Ramsey began. For Marcus, this was more than a legal battle, it was a chance to show the community that justice could prevail. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on a foundation of damning evidence and powerful testimonies. Ramsey's defense, however, attempted to shift the blame onto the department, portraying him as a scapegoat for systemic failures. The argument was weak, but it introduced doubt that Marcus had to dispel. Over the course of the trial, witnesses recounted their experiences with Ramsey, painting a vivid picture of his abuse of power. Among them was Vanessa, the young woman whose video had sparked the movement. "I was scared," she admitted on the stand. "But I knew I had to speak up." Her testimony was a turning point, resonating deeply with the jury. Outside the courthouse, the protests continued, their chants a constant reminder of what was at stake. Marcus used the momentum to deliver a closing argument that left the courtroom silent. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," he said. "It's about restoring faith in a system that has failed us. Today, we have the opportunity to take the first step toward that restoration." The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering their verdict, guilty on all counts. The announcement was met with an eruption of emotion, both inside the courtroom and out. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Back at the hospital, he shared the news with Jim, who responded with a faint but unmistakable smile. The conviction of Harold Ramsey marked a pivotal moment in Brookhaven's history, but it also came at a cost. The fight for justice had exposed deep divisions within the community, and the road to rebuilding trust was fraught with challenges. Marcus spent his days coordinating with activists, legal experts, and community leaders to implement reforms, including oversight committees and mandatory training for officers. Yet, the weight of the fight continued to bear down on him. At the hospital, Jim's recovery remained slow but steady. One afternoon, as Marcus sat by his bedside, Jim opened his eyes fully for the first time since the attack. "You did it, son," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with pride. Marcus felt a surge of emotion, his father's words reaffirming everything he had fought for. The community celebrated the victory but remained vigilant. "This isn't the end," Marcus told a gathering of supporters. "It's the beginning of a new chapter, one where we hold each other accountable and build a better future." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the resilience of a town determined to rise above its past. The aftermath of Harold Ramsey's conviction sent shockwaves through Brookhaven, but the trial of Paul Simmons loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. For Marcus, this was the true battle, exposing and dismantling the system Simmons had built. The former chief, once the untouchable figurehead of the Brookhaven Police Department, now sat behind bars awaiting trial. Yet, Simmons's influence lingered, with whispers of allies within the department working to sabotage Marcus's efforts. Late one night, Marcus and his team gathered in his office to review the mounting evidence against Simmons. Danielle's whistleblower documents had provided a damning trail, but Julia warned that Simmons's legal team would fight tooth and nail to discredit everything. "He's going to frame this as a misunderstanding, a few bad decisions," she said, pacing. "We need to prove intent." The team worked tirelessly to connect the dots, poring over financial records, email exchanges, and Ramsey's testimony. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Simmons had orchestrated a web of corruption that extended far beyond Brookhaven. Meanwhile, the community's support for Marcus reached new heights. The rallies evolved into organized committees aimed at reforming local policies. Churches, businesses, and schools became hubs of activism, their leaders inspired by Jim's story and Marcus's perseverance. But not everyone supported the changes. A small but vocal group began pushing back, accusing Marcus of dividing the town. Their protests were minor at first, but they gained traction as Simmons's allies fed them misinformation. One evening, as Marcus returned home, he found a threatening letter taped to his door. The message was clear: drop the case, or you'll regret it. Marcus refused to let fear dictate his actions. He doubled his security measures and pressed forward, knowing that Simmons's trial would be the defining moment of his career. The courtroom was packed on the first day of proceedings. Simmons's defense team, led by a slick attorney with a reputation for twisting narratives, painted him as a scapegoat for the department's broader failures. But Marcus countered with a methodical presentation of evidence, starting with Ramsey's testimony and culminating in the financial records that exposed Simmons's bribes and cover-ups. The trial was a grueling marathon, with each day bringing new revelations that further implicated Simmons. Witnesses testified about threats, intimidation, and systemic corruption, their stories painting a damning picture of a man who had wielded power without accountability. Outside the courthouse, the protests continued, their chants echoing through the streets. Marcus used the momentum to deliver a closing argument that left the courtroom in stunned silence. "This case isn't just about one man's actions," he said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It's about a system that allowed those actions to go unchecked. Today, we have the chance to say no more." The jury deliberated for 5 days, the tension in the town reaching a fever pitch. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, the courthouse erupted in cheers. Marcus stood tall, his father's voice echoing in his mind, "Never back down from what's right." As the town celebrated Simmons's conviction, Marcus found himself drawn back to the hospital, where Jim's slow recovery served as a grounding reminder of why this fight mattered. The once sterile room had transformed into a space of hope, adorned with cards and flowers from supporters. Marcus sat beside Jim's bed, updating him on the trial's outcome. "We did it, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Simmons is done." Jim, though still weak, managed a faint smile. "Proud of you, son," he whispered, his voice raspy but filled with conviction. The moment was fleeting but powerful, reigniting Marcus's determination to see the reforms through. Outside the hospital, the vigils continued, their glow a beacon of unity. The community, once fractured by fear and injustice, began to heal. Families who had long suffered in silence shared their stories, finding strength in one another. At a town hall meeting, Marcus spoke directly to the people of Brookhaven. "Justice is a journey, not a destination," he said. "Today, we take the next step by ensuring this never happens again." The meeting ended with a standing ovation, but Marcus knew the road ahead would be difficult. Implementing reforms required navigating bureaucratic hurdles and winning over skeptics. Julia took the lead on drafting policy changes, while David focused on investigating other departments with similar issues. Together, they worked tirelessly to create a blueprint for systemic change. Meanwhile, Jim's condition continued to improve. One afternoon, as Marcus recounted the latest developments, Jim gripped his hand tightly. "You're doing good work," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The progress was slow but steady, each small victory a testament to Jim's resilience and Marcus's unwavering commitment. Brookhaven had become a symbol of hope and resilience, but the work was far from over. The conviction of Simmons marked the beginning of a larger movement, one that Marcus and his team were determined to lead. They worked closely with community leaders to establish oversight committees, mandatory training programs, and transparent complaint systems. The changes weren't without resistance, but the momentum was undeniable. Marcus's work caught the attention of state officials, who invited him to help draft legislation aimed at reforming law enforcement practices statewide. For Marcus, the opportunity was both humbling and daunting. "This isn't just about Brookhaven anymore," Julia said during a late-night meeting. "This is about setting a precedent for the entire state." The first draft of the legislation, known as the Mitchell Act, outlined measures to increase accountability and transparency within police departments. It was met with mixed reactions, with some praising its ambition and others decrying it as overreach. Marcus remained steadfast, using every platform available to advocate for the bill. Back in Brookhaven, the community continued to rally around Marcus and Jim. The vigils evolved into celebrations as Jim regained his strength, his recovery a symbol of the town's resilience. One evening, as Marcus stood in the town square addressing a crowd, Jim joined him on stage, leaning on a cane but standing tall. The sight drew thunderous applause, the town's collective voice echoing through the night. "This is what unity looks like," Marcus said, his arm around his father. "This is what justice feels like." The passage of the Mitchell Act marked a turning point not just for Brookhaven but for communities across the state. Marcus, now a symbol of justice and reform, continued his work, balancing his role as a prosecutor with his newfound responsibilities as an advocate for change. The town, once defined by its struggles, became a model for resilience and accountability. As Marcus and Jim walked through the revitalized town square one sunny afternoon, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You never gave up," Jim said, his voice filled with pride. "Neither did you," Marcus replied with a smile. Their bond, forged through adversity, stood as a testament to the power of perseverance. That evening, Marcus addressed the nation in a televised interview, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. "Justice isn't just about laws," he said. "It's about people. It's about community. And it's about never losing hope." As the credits rolled on the chapter of Brookhaven's fight for justice, Marcus knew the work was far from over. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe, knowing that together, they had made a difference. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. What did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future stories. See you next time.